Wichita, Clay, and Montague counties from 1861 to 1865 were strategic outposts against Indian attacks on the unprotected settlements, unprotected because the fighting men were enlisted in the great civil struggle. There were 7 families of us in Wichita County at the close of the Civil War at a camp called Red River Station. The station, about half a mile from the river, was immediately abandoned, and the whole settlement moved into the more civilized territory of Collin County. My father, William Gabriel, and 6 other soldiers formed the river camp. There were other small companies in Montague and Clay. The names of the other soldiers with my father are kind of vague. There were Mr. Sparks, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Roberts, and Mac Bowen. Mac Bowen was riding back to the station after scouting around when a party of Indians sighted him. They spread out and headed him off. He whipped up his horse to a gallop, but they knew what they were doing. They crowded him, horse and all, off a 30-foot bluff. The fall didn't kill him, so the savages shot him with 27 arrows and musket balls. They slid off their horses and down the banks to scalp him. When my father and the others found him, they believed he was alive even after he'd been scalped by the bloody grass he clutched in his hands. He had pulled up the grass in his agony and rubbed it across his head. After that, the soldiers tried another treaty with the Indians. During a peace powwow, one of the soldiers spotted the new clothes Bowen's wife had made for him, and he'd worn on the day of his death. The brave who wore Bowen's clothes completed the costume with Bowen's scalp. The Indians would promise to be good, but on the first full moon when it was light, they'd sneak into camp and steal the soldiers' horses and cattle. Shortly after Bowen's death, a soldier named Snodgrass was killed by the Indians. I never will forget that because his wife rolled around in the yard and yelled and tore her hair out. She was real young and couldn't stand this country. There was plenty of wild game. The soldiers' families had their cows, and that meant plenty of milk and butter. But bread was a luxury. The nearest flour mill was in Collin County. And when you went from here to Collins County by ox team, you had a right smart trip on your hands. I remember distinctly that there were all kinds of wild varmints, turkey, buffalo, and wild cattle. Sometimes the soldiers would catch the wild calves and turn them into pens with their own stock. Several times the soldiers tried to build an earthen rampart behind which the women could barricade themselves when the men were out scouting. The project was never completed. Some farmer probably came across that short earth wall about 10 years later and wondered if some Indian had tried to build a dirt house.
Mrs. Quisenberry finally returned to the county of Wichita, making her home with her daughter, Mrs. Catherine Saving. Previously, since 1865, she had lived in Collin and Cook counties.
It was funny, but as long as we lived in this county with the excitement and all, I wasn't afraid. But after we moved to the safety of Collin County, the sight of a man in a spotted beef-hide shirt used to send me screaming for the farmhouse. Mrs. M.E. Quisenberry,